The message came at 11:42 p.m., a short vibration on a phone that rarely received anything except acquisition deals and investment alerts. But this one was different. It was from an unknown number. A child's number. "He's beating my mama. Please help." Malachi Grant stared at the screen, his dark eyes narrowing in the dim glow of his penthouse office. He frowned at first, thinking it was a mistake, a scam, a wrong number. Then another text arrived, shorter, shakier. "I'm hiding. He said he'll kill her." Malachi's breath stilled. He had seen fear. He had caused fear in boardrooms where weak men crumbled under his gaze, but he had never seen this. A child begging a stranger because she had no one else left. He typed only 3 words. "I'm on my way." No hesitation, no questions, no second thoughts. His assistant froze as he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the door. "Mr. Grant, where are you going?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because something in that child's words, that trembling desperation, hit a part of him he thought had died years ago. As his blacked-out Maybach tore through the streets of Atlanta, another message appeared. "I hear footsteps. Please hurry." Malachi clenched the steering wheel. His pulse hammered. Lights blurred past. By the time he reached the address, he already knew. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as a billionaire. He was arriving as the only hope that little girl had left. And what he found inside that house changed everything. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that heaven sends help through the most unexpected messengers, hit that subscribe button, because this story is the reminder you've been praying for. Malachi Grant had built his empire on one simple principle. Trust no one, love nothing, feel nothing. For 23 years, he had dominated Atlanta's skyline with luxury high-rises and tech investments that made Silicon Valley investors nervous. His name alone could shift markets. His reputation had been carved from calculated risk, relentless ambition, and the kind of strategic brilliance that kept competitors awake at night. But sitting in his custom Maybach, racing through empty streets toward an address he'd never seen, Malachi felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. The GPS announced 12 minutes to destination. 12 minutes for a little girl who might not have 12 seconds. His phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another message that made his chest tighten. "I can't find Mama anymore. There's so much blood." Malachi pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine roared through the quiet neighborhood as streetlights streaked like golden bullets. He had driven these same streets countless times before, investing in communities, renovating forgotten blocks, but never like this. Never with the weight of genuine fear crushing his lungs. You see, Malachi Grant wasn't supposed to care about random children texting wrong numbers. He wasn't supposed to care about anything except quarterly earnings and expansion strategies. But that night, speeding toward a crisis he couldn't control or negotiate his way out of, he found himself remembering things he had spent years trying to forget. 25 years earlier, Malachi had been a different man entirely. Back then, he went by his birth name, Michael Grant. He lived in a cramped apartment in East Atlanta with his younger sister, Zaria, and their mother, Gloria. They were poor, but they were happy. Gloria worked double shifts as a nursing assistant, while Michael took care of Zaria after school. He helped her with homework, braided her hair, made her dinner, and tucked her into bed with stories about queens and warriors who looked like them. Zaria was 8 years old. She had thick cornrows that clicked with colorful beads when she laughed, and a smile that could light up their tiny kitchen on the coldest winter mornings. She believed her big brother could fix anything, solve any problem, chase away any monster hiding under her bed. One Thursday evening in November, Michael was working his part-time job at an auto shop when the call came. His boss handed him the phone with a grim expression. The voice on the other end belonged to a police officer. There had been an incident at their apartment complex. A domestic dispute in the unit next door had escalated into violence. Shots were fired through thin walls. Gloria and Zaria had been caught in the crossfire. Michael dropped everything and ran. He ran through streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. He ran past familiar corners that now seemed like tombstones, marking the death of everything he had ever loved. When he reached Grady Hospital, the fluorescent lights felt like interrogation lamps. exposing every failure, every moment he hadn't been there to protect them. Gloria survived with minor injuries. Zarya did not. Michael held his little sister's hand as machines beeped around them like mechanical heartbeats, counting down to silence. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so fragile, like a butterfly with broken wings. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about internal bleeding and trauma too severe for her tiny body to overcome. But before the machines went quiet, Zarya squeezed his hand one last time. She looked up at him with those same trusting eyes that had always believed he could fix anything. "Mikey," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Promise me you'll help other kids when they're scared." Michael promised. It was the last conversation they ever had. After the funeral, something fundamental shifted inside Michael Grant. The part of him that believed in justice, in fairness, in the possibility that good people could live safe lives, died with Zarya. What emerged from that grief was colder, harder, more calculating. He realized that the police couldn't protect his family. The system had failed everyone he loved. The neighborhood they lived in had been neglected, underfunded, forgotten, and his sister had paid the price. So Michael decided to become something the system couldn't ignore. He started small, tutoring kids in the neighborhood, saving every dollar from his auto shop job. He taught himself coding at the public library, studied business at community college while working nights. He learned how power really worked in Atlanta, who controlled what, where the real decisions got made, who got left behind. Within 5 years, he had launched his first tech startup, an app connecting underserved communities to essential services. Within 10 years, he had sold that company for 8 figures and begun buying up neglected properties in forgotten Black neighborhoods, renovating them, creating spaces where families like his could thrive safely. Within 15 years, he owned half the commercial real estate in 3 counties. And somewhere along the way, Michael Grant disappeared entirely. What remained was Malachi Grant, a name he chose himself, meaning messenger or my angel, a man who had built walls around his heart so thick that nothing could penetrate them, a man who had convinced himself that caring about anyone was a luxury he couldn't afford. Until tonight, the GPS announced 5 minutes to destination. Malachi's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Another text came through. This one was different, weaker. "I think I'm going to sleep now. I'm really tired." That message hit Malachi like a physical blow. He recognized the tone immediately. He had heard it before in his sister's voice during those final hours. It was the sound of someone giving up, of a child's body shutting down from trauma and fear. "No," he said aloud to his empty car. "Not tonight. Not again." Malachi grabbed his phone and typed rapidly while steering with one hand. "Stay awake. Talk to me. What's your name?" The response came back slowly. "Aaliyah. I'm Aaliyah. Aaliyah, my name is Malachi. I'm almost there. You need to stay awake for me. Can you do that?" "I'll try." "Good girl. Tell me about your mama. What's her name? Renee?" "Renee Peterson. She makes the best peach cobbler. She reads me stories every night." Malachi felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl, hiding in terror, was talking about bedtime stories and peach cobbler. She was talking about the kind of normal, beautiful life that Zarya never got to finish living. The GPS announced 1 minute to destination. Malachi could see the address now, a small 2-story house with a broken porch light and overgrown hedges. Most of the windows were dark, but he could see flickering movement inside, shadows dancing against drawn curtains. He parked across the street and studied the scene. No police cars, no ambulance, no neighbors peering from windows. Whatever was happening inside that house, it was happening in complete isolation. Aaliyah and her mother were facing this nightmare alone. Malachi checked the interior of his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp and still. He could hear muffled sounds coming from inside the house, shouting, something breaking, a woman's voice pleading. His phone buzzed one more time. Aaliyah's message made his blood run cold. "He found me." Malachi moved toward the house like a man on a mission, silent, purposeful, unstoppable. But tonight, the roles were different than any business deal he'd ever closed. Tonight, he was hunting something far more dangerous than corrupt investors or predatory developers. He was hunting a monster who hurt children. The front door hung slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Malachi could hear Aaliyah's attacker moving through the house, his heavy footsteps echoing against hardwood floors like thunder in the silence. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, called out threats that made Malachi's jaw clench. "Come out, you little brat. You think you can hide from me forever?" Malachi's phone vibrated. Aaliyah had sent one final message, just 2 words that nearly brought him to his knees. "Help Mama." He slipped through the front door without a sound. The house reeked of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something else, something metallic that Malachi recognized immediately. Blood. Fresh blood. The living room was a disaster zone. Furniture overturned, picture frames shattered across the floor. Family photos torn and scattered like fallen leaves. In the center of it all lay Renee Peterson, Aaliyah's mother. She was unconscious, her dark hair matted with blood, her breathing shallow and labored. But she was alive. Malachi knelt beside her, checking her pulse with the same gentle touch he had once used to comfort Zaria. Renee's heartbeat was weak but steady. She had taken a brutal beating, but she would survive if she got medical attention soon. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The man was getting closer to wherever Aaliyah was hiding. Malachi could hear him yanking open doors, cursing when he found empty closets and bathrooms. "I know you're in here somewhere, you little pest. When I find you, you're gonna wish you never picked up that phone." Malachi rose slowly. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash 23 years of controlled power. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't about deals or leverage or strategic positioning. This was personal in a way that reached down to the broken parts of his soul and demanded justice. What happened next would determine whether Troy Haskins, the man terrorizing this family, ever saw another sunrise, and whether Malachi Grant could finally keep the promise he made to his sister 25 years ago. The attacker appeared at the end of the hallway. He was a big man, probably 6'3", with arms like tree trunks and hands stained with Renee's blood. His name was Troy Haskins, though Malachi didn't know that yet. What Malachi could see immediately was the kind of cowardly brutality that targeted the helpless, the vulnerable, the innocent. Troy froze when he saw Malachi standing in his living room. For a moment, confusion flickered across his drunken features. This wasn't what he expected to find. This wasn't a neighbor or a police officer or some concerned citizen who would back down when threatened. This was a 6'2" black man in a $3,000 suit, standing with the kind of quiet authority that made boardrooms go silent. This was something else entirely. "Who the hell are you?" Troy slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. "This ain't your business, pal. Get out of my house before I throw you out." Malachi said nothing. He simply studied Troy with the same cold calculation he had once used to evaluate failing companies before dismantling them. He cataloged weaknesses, measured distances, calculated exactly how much force would be required to neutralize this threat permanently. "I said get out," Troy roared, stumbling forward with his fists raised. Malachi moved like lightning striking water. One moment, Troy was charging toward him. The next, he was flat on his back with Malachi's hand wrapped around his throat. The speed and precision of the takedown was surgical, professional, terrifying in its efficiency. "Listen very carefully," Malachi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to ask you one question, and your life depends on giving me the right answer. Where is the little girl?" Troy's eyes bulged as he struggled against Malachi's grip. He tried to speak, but only managed choking sounds. Malachi loosened his hold just enough to allow words. "I don't know what you're talking about," Troy gasped. "Wrong answer." Malachi's grip tightened again, this time with enough pressure to make Troy's vision start to fade around the edges. "Let me rephrase that. Aaliyah Peterson, 8 years old, brown skin, probably hiding somewhere in this house while you terrorized her and beat her mother unconscious. Where is she?" The mention of Aaliyah's name seemed to penetrate Troy's alcohol-soaked brain. His expression shifted from confusion to something approaching fear. Not fear of Malachi, not yet, but fear that his secret was exposed. "She's probably upstairs," he wheezed. "Look, man, this is all a misunderstanding. Renee's my girlfriend. We had a fight, things got out of hand, but Aaliyah's not even my kid. I was just trying to discipline her." Malachi's other hand moved to his jacket. Troy's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of something that made the gravity of his situation become crystal clear. "Please," Troy whispered. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." "Neither did I," Malachi replied. But before he could make his next move, a small voice called out from upstairs, weak, frightened, but unmistakably alive. "Malachi? Is that you?" Aaliyah. She had remembered the name he gave her in their text conversation. She was calling for him like he was some kind of hero, some kind of savior who could make all the monsters go away. Malachi felt something shift inside his chest. The same crack that had started in his car widened into a fissure that threatened to split his carefully constructed walls completely open. "I'm here, Aaliyah," he called back. "You're safe now. Come down when you're ready." Troy tried to struggle beneath Malachi's grip, but it was like trying to move a mountain. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "That kid's been nothing but trouble since her dad died. Renee can't control her. Someone has to teach her respect." Respect? Malachi's voice carried the kind of deadly calm that had preceded some of his most ruthless business decisions. "You want to talk about respect?" He leaned closer, his face inches from Troy's. "Let me tell you about respect. Respect is what a child should feel when she's safe in her own home. Respect is what a mother should expect when she's trying to protect her daughter. Respect is what you should have shown before you decided to terrorize a family." Footsteps on the stairs. Light, hesitant, but growing closer. Aaliyah was coming down to meet the stranger who had answered her desperate plea for help. Malachi made a decision that would haunt Troy Haskins for the rest of his considerably shortened life. He hauled the man to his feet and dragged him toward the kitchen, out of Aaliyah's line of sight. What happened next would determine whether Troy lived to see another sunrise. But it wouldn't happen in front of a traumatized child. "Aaliyah," Malachi called over his shoulder, "stay with your mama. I'm going to call an ambulance. Everything's going to be okay now." As he pushed Troy into the kitchen, Malachi caught his first glimpse of Aaliyah Peterson. She stood at the bottom of the stairs like a ghost, her small frame trembling in pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns. Her hair was pulled back in 2 puffs, her brown eyes wide with the kind of terror that no child should ever experience. But she was alive. She was breathing. She was looking at him with the same trusting expression Zaria had worn all those years ago. "Thank you for coming," Aaliyah whispered. Those 5 words nearly destroyed Malachi completely, because in that moment, he realized that this wasn't about revenge or justice or settling scores. This was about keeping a promise he had made to a dying 8-year-old girl 25 years ago. This was about helping other kids when they were scared. The kitchen door swung shut behind them, and Troy Haskins found himself face to face with a man who had just remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting. In the kitchen, away from Aaliyah's innocent eyes, Troy discovered what it meant to face a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The overhead light flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting shadows that danced across Troy's terrified face. Malachi pressed Troy against the kitchen counter with surgical precision. Every movement was calculated, controlled, purposeful. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself," Malachi said, his voice so quiet it was almost conversational. "And I suggest you choose your words very carefully, because they might be the last ones you ever speak." Troy's hands shook as he tried to form words. The alcohol that had fueled his earlier brutality now worked against him, making his thoughts sluggish and his tongue thick. "Look, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole situation. Enlighten me. Renee's been seeing me for 6 months. Ever since her husband died in that car accident, she's been a mess. Can't control the kid, can't pay her bills, can't keep the house together. I've been helping her out, giving her money, fixing things around here, trying to be a father figure to Aaliyah." Malachi's expression never changed, but Troy could sense something shifting in the air around them. Something dangerous building like pressure before a storm. "Go on," Malachi said. "Tonight was different. Renee had been drinking, and we got into an argument about Aaliyah's behavior. The kid's been acting out ever since her dad died, talking back, refusing to do chores, staying out past curfew. Renee asked me to help discipline her, but when I tried to talk to Aaliyah, she got mouthy with me." Troy paused, gauging Malachi's reaction. The complete stillness of the man before him was more terrifying than any shouting or threats could have been. "So you beat an unconscious woman and terrorized her 8-year-old daughter," Malachi stated. It wasn't a question. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Renee got between us when I was trying to teach Elias some respect. She started hitting me, scratching at my face, screaming. Wait, I pushed her away, maybe a little too hard, and she fell and hit her head on the coffee table. It was an accident. "And Aaliyah?" Troy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She saw everything, started screaming and crying, saying she was going to call the police. I couldn't let her do that. I've got warrants, man. Unpaid child support, assault charges from my ex-wife. If the cops showed up, I'd be back in county lockup before morning." Malachi absorbed this information like a computer processing data. Every detail, every excuse, every justification Troy offered only confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was the behavior pattern of a predator who had been escalating his violence until someone finally stopped him. "So you chased a traumatized child through her own home?" Malachi continued. "You destroyed her sense of safety, her trust in the adults who were supposed to protect her, and you did it all to save yourself from facing the consequences of your previous crimes." When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was. "No," Malachi said, finally allowing a hint of emotion to creep into his voice. "It sounds exactly like what it was." In the living room, they could hear Aaliyah's soft voice talking to her unconscious mother. She was telling Renee about the nice man who had come to help them, promising her that everything would be okay now, begging her to wake up so they could go get ice cream tomorrow like they had planned. The sound of that small voice, so full of hope despite everything she had endured, broke something fundamental inside Malachi. All the walls he had built, all the barriers he had constructed to keep the world at arm's length, crumbled in an instant. He thought about Zaria's final moments, how she had made him promise to help other scared children. He thought about all the years he had spent convincing himself that promise was impossible to keep, that caring about anyone would only lead to more pain. But Aaliyah Peterson had proven him wrong. Her desperate text message had reached across the darkness of his carefully constructed isolation and reminded him who he used to be, who he could still choose to become. "Troy," Malachi said, his voice taking on a different quality entirely. "I want you to understand something. In my line of work, I've encountered every kind of person you can imagine. Predatory investors who destroy communities, corrupt developers who displace families, corporate executives who poison neighborhoods for profit. But you know what I've learned in all my years doing this?" Troy shook his head, too terrified to speak. "The worst monsters aren't the ones who destroy for business. They're the ones who hurt children for pleasure." Malachi's phone buzzed, a text from his chief of staff checking on his location. He ignored it completely. Tonight, the business empire he had spent decades building seemed less important than the 8-year-old girl in the next room who had trusted a stranger to save her life. "Here's what's going to happen," Malachi continued. "You're going to walk out that back door and disappear from this city forever. You're never going to contact Renee Peterson again. You're never going to come within 10 miles of Aaliyah Peterson again. You're going to find a new place to live, a new job, maybe even a new name if you're smart." Troy's eyes widened with hope. This wasn't the death sentence he had expected. "But," Malachi added, and that single word carried enough weight to crush Troy's relief entirely, "if I ever hear about you laying hands on another woman or child, if your name crosses my desk in connection with any kind of domestic violence, if you so much as raise your voice to someone weaker than you, I will find you." Malachi leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. "And when I find you, Troy Haskins, what I do to you will make tonight look like a gentle conversation between friends. Do we understand each other?" Troy nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Good. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you walk away from this." Troy scrambled toward the back door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the handle. As he stepped into the darkness beyond, Malachi called out one final warning. "Troy, the clock starts now. You have 24 hours to be gone from this city. 25 hours from now, if you're still here, our conversation continues. Permanently. The door slammed shut, leaving Malachi alone in the kitchen with the weight of his decision. He had let Troy live, but not out of mercy. He had let Troy live because killing him would have been the easy solution, the old solution. Tonight called for something different. Tonight called for the kind of justice that gave second chances while making consequences crystal clear. Malachi pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Dr. Naomi Brooks answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Malachi, what's wrong? I need a favor, Naomi. A woman named Renee Peterson, unconscious from head trauma concussion. She needs immediate medical attention, but no questions asked, no police reports filed. Where are you? Malachi gave her the address. Dr. Brooks had been his personal physician for 15 years, and she understood the unspoken rules of their arrangement. She treated his injuries, his colleagues' injuries, and occasionally the injuries of people who needed help but couldn't afford to involve law enforcement. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Is this connected to business? No, Malachi replied, surprising himself with the honesty of that answer. This is personal. After ending the call, Malachi walked back into the living room, where Aaliyah sat beside her mother, holding Renee's hand and whispering gentle encouragement. The sight of her small figure maintaining such brave composure in the face of unimaginable trauma reminded him so powerfully of Zaria that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. Aaliyah looked up as he approached. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Relief, gratitude, trust. Is he gone? She asked quietly. He's gone, Malachi confirmed. He won't be coming back. Is Mama going to be okay? Malachi knelt beside Aaliyah, bringing himself down to her eye level, just as he had done with Zaria so many years ago. I've called a very good doctor. She's going to take care of your mama and make sure she gets better. Aaliyah nodded, accepting this promise with the simple faith that children possessed before the world taught them to doubt. Malachi, she said, using the name he had given her during their text conversation. Why did you come help us? You don't even know us. The question hit him like a physical blow. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that her desperate message had reached across decades of buried grief and reawakened parts of his soul he thought were dead forever? How could he tell her that helping her was really about honoring a promise he had made to another little girl who hadn't lived to see her 9th birthday? Because, he said finally, someone very important once made me promise to help kids when they were scared. Who was that? My sister. Her name was Zaria. Aaliyah seemed to consider this seriously. Is she nice? She was the nicest person I ever knew. Where is she now? Malachi felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes for the first time in 25 years. She's in heaven, but I think she would have liked you very much. Aaliyah reached out and took his hand with the same trusting gesture Zaria had used during those final moments in the hospital. The contact sent shockwaves through Malachi's carefully controlled emotional defenses. I'm glad you kept your promise to her, Aaliyah said simply. In that moment, Malachi realized that everything in his life had been leading to this point. All the struggles, all the success, all the wealth he had accumulated over the years suddenly seemed like preparation for something larger. He had built an empire of opportunity and power. But tonight, that empire had served something greater than profit. Car lights swept across the front windows. Dr. Brooks had arrived with her medical equipment and her discretion intact. Soon Renee would receive the care she needed, and Aaliyah would have her mother back. But Malachi knew that his involvement in their lives was just beginning. Because for the first time in decades, he had found something worth protecting that had nothing to do with quarterly returns or market expansion or influence earned through strategic positioning. He had found a family that needed him. And perhaps more importantly, he had found his way back to the promise he had made to Zaria all those years ago. The promise that would transform not just Aaliyah and Renee's lives, but his own in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As Dr. Brooks worked on Renee and Aaliyah watched anxiously from the couch, Malachi stepped outside to make another phone call. This one would set in motion changes that would ripple through his organization and beyond. "Vincent," he said when his chief of staff answered, "I need you to arrange something. A trust fund, completely anonymous, enough to cover college tuition and living expenses for a young girl. And I want a property management company to handle the Peterson family's housing situation. Whatever they need." "Boss, what's going on?" "I'm keeping a promise," Malachi replied. "And Vincent, clear my schedule for the next few weeks. I have some personal business to attend to." For the first time in 25 years, Malachi Grant was putting family first. And the little girl who had sent a desperate text to a wrong number was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected guardian angels come wearing tailored suits and carrying the weight of their own redemption stories. 6 months later, Aaliyah Peterson stood in the doorway of her new bedroom, watching through sparkling clean windows as children played in the safe neighborhood Malachi had quietly moved them to. Renee had recovered completely. Her bruises long faded, her smile returned, her strength rebuilt. But the real transformation belonged to the man who had answered a desperate child's text message. Malachi visited every Sunday, not as the feared billionaire of Atlanta, but as Uncle Malachi, the man who taught Aaliyah chess and helped with her math homework and made sure she knew she was safe, valued, protected. He had kept his promise to Zaria in ways he never imagined possible. The empire he had built through ambition now served a different purpose, protecting families like Renee and Aaliyah from the monsters that lurked in the shadows, investing in communities that looked like the one he grew up in, creating opportunities for children who reminded him of who he used to be. Troy Haskins had vanished that night, just as Malachi promised he would. Word had spread through certain circles about what happened to men who hurt children in Malachi Grant's city. The message was clear and absolute. But the most profound change wasn't in Atlanta's streets or in the Peterson household. It was in Malachi himself. He had discovered that the hardest heart could choose love over isolation, that the most guarded soul could find redemption in the innocent trust of a child who needed saving. Aaliyah's desperate text had been sent to the wrong number. But sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, wearing expensive suits and carrying the weight of promises made to dying children. As Aaliyah ran downstairs to greet Uncle Malachi for their Sunday afternoon together, she had no idea that her courage that terrible night had saved more than just her and her mother. She had saved the soul of a man who thought he had lost his humanity forever. And in doing so, she had proven that even in our darkest moments, when we reach out for help, even to a stranger, even to the wrong number, we might just find exactly who we needed all along. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in unexpected forms. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and remember, sometimes keeping one promise can change everything.